From Microbe TV, this is TWiP, This Week in Parasitism, episode 108, recorded on April 20th, 2016. Hi, everybody. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and joining me are Dickson Despommier.
Hello, Vincent.
And Daniel Griffin.
Hello.
How are you?
And hello.
How are all of you today? Are you all well?
We're good. I think I'm good.
No, I asked you if you were well.
Oh, I'm well. I'm very, very
this is a
well.
wellness...
A wellness clinic? Great.
You know that concept, right, Daniel? Wellness.
I am well also. My cholesterol, my blood pressure.
Really?
I was just looking at the actuarial curves, and my BMI and fat index are right where they need to be.
Oh, my God.
I'm very well.
Daniel, when I was young, we used to call it a physical. Now they call it a wellness visit. What's the reason? So you can get it on insurance paid for, or what? Actually, many insurances don't even pay for wellness visits, right?
No, this is true. I think they change it. It's marketing, right? I hate to say it, but it's medicine is a business, and there for a long time was the idea that this yearly physical was maybe not important, and there's a lot of literature questioning the importance. So now they've marketed it as the well baby, the well adult check.
Right.
Seems a shame that they shouldn't pay for it, right? Because after all, prevention is cheaper than curing, isn't it, Dickson and Daniel?
Wait a minute.
Right?
Medicine, if it was cheaper than curing, then they'd go out of business if they just didn't have anything to cure.
Yeah. This episode is brought to you by the American Society for Microbiology. They want you to know about their Agar Art Contest. It is a contest where you take a petri dish and apply bacteria in an artistic way. Different bacteria that make different colors. You could make Starry Night. You could do all kinds of things.
Scary Night.
Scary Night. You could do a zombie thing, whatever you'd like.
That's right.
You could take a picture of it and submit it. The deadline is Friday, May 6th. The winners and select runners-up will be showcased. Actually, it's runner-ups, right? Not runners-up. Runner-ups. Yeah, I read it wrong. Will be showcased in a gallery at ASM Microbe 2016, which is the big microbiology meeting taking place in Boston this June. Winners will also receive a free ASM book of their choosing. For full contest guidelines and terms and conditions, visit bit.ly/agarart2016. We thank ASM for their support of TWiP. I just want to warn everyone that very soon we will start doing advertisements on TWiP, TWIM, TWiV, TWiVo, Urban Ag. I signed a contract yesterday.
Very cool.
For 3 months of ads, cool. And we'll see if it works. Yep. A way to support the podcast of Microbe TV without asking our listeners for help. If it doesn't work, and that's fine, it's an experiment. In science, sometimes things fail, right, Dickson?
Yeah, this is true. Maybe we could have a week of fundraising like they do on NPR.
Maybe.
Where, just ask the listeners, this show is brought to you by the listeners like you.
That's the alternative. If the advertising doesn't work, we will do crowdsourcing, and that's fine. But I wanted to try this, and it's an interesting company. You'll see. We may have several, but we're starting off with one, and you will hear their ads on every episode. And all I ask is that you visit their website to show that the listeners of Microbe TV podcasts check out advertising. That's it. If it doesn't work, it's fine. I get it.
We'll see.
We will see. We shall see. By the way, Dickson,
yes.
with 385, failure, fantastic episode.
How many listeners actually plugged into that one, do you think?
I don't know, but I got a lot of tweets saying I went out and bought the book right away.
Oh, nice.
So it was a good I actually listened to it, which I don't always do because I hear it a few times during the recording and then editing afterwards.
Right.
And it was really good.
Oh, good. We had a good time.
Because Firestein, is that how you say his name?
Yeah, I think that's right.
He's a very interesting fellow.
I would agree.
Failure. I certainly have had my share.
Well.
Have you?
Of course.
Or are you 100% successful?
No. Never.
All right. Let's go to the gentleman from Assam.
Yes.
Let me remind everybody, and as I like to say, acquaint all our people tuning in for the first time with our mystery case from last TWiP. The case was, as I described, a fun case from India. It's a 45-year-old gentleman from Assam, India. That's northeast India. And he came in with 16 years of fever, abdominal pain, darkening of the skin, yellowing of the eyes. He's a farmer, but he did not have much energy. He works barefoot in the fields. He reports that the fever occurs every other day. He said that as far as prior medical problems, he had nothing out of the ordinary prior to this. No surgeries, no meds, has never seen a physician. It's the first time seeing a doc. He is married with kids. He reports no extramarital affairs. He's HIV negative. He eats mostly vegetables, and these are all well cooked. He lives in a concrete house with no screens, no mosquito netting. So we have the insect exposure. Other people in the area have similar problems. His water comes from a pump. They fill plastic jugs. And he's been living in Assam his whole life. And he finally came to this regional medical center after 16 years for evaluation.
Wow.
When he's seen, he is a thin, underweight gentleman. Though he has no pets, he does report that there's a lot of dogs around, and he does avoid dogs. We mentioned there's a lot of rabies in India. There's also cows and monkeys. Never been bitten by either, particularly the cows. He says his appetite is fair. Maybe it's been better in the past. And on exam, he does have a fever when he's seen. There's a darkening, particularly of the face, which the report is that this has increased over time, and also on the extremities. The whites of his eyes were yellow, or jaundiced, as we say. And striking things on exam were that he has an enlarged liver and a markedly enlarged spleen. We got some blood work, and we saw that he had an elevated bilirubin, some increased liver enzymes, and on a careful skin examination, there were no sort of like focal scars, a bunch of cuts and scrapes and things like that, but no focal lesions were seen. All right.
Roger that.
And Dickson, I know you guessed.
Well, I used to teach this subject for 38 years. If I can't get this one, then I should hang it up.
You should go out the window, right?
I should become a clown in a circus or something. And
oh no, this is going to be embarrassing when Dickson gets this wrong. I feel so bad.
I've been clowning all my life.
It's like playing battleships. Now I want to move the ship and give the guy a different diagnosis just to harass Dickson.
Well, you could do that if you'd like. Go ahead.
No, he has the diagnosis that he has.
I'm not going to change.
We have a number of guesses.
We do.
First one, I'm going to let Daniel read because it's from our medical student at Hofstra Northwell School of Medicine.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Yosef writes, hello, Yosef. Dear the Three Twipeteers, for this case, my diagnosis is Plasmodium vivax. Malaria can cause a tertian fever every other day, as the hypnozoites in the liver release more schizonts and merozoites. I'm unaware of any single infection that can last 16 years. After some research, I was able to find someone who seems to have had Plasmodium malaria infection for more than 40 years, but she was mostly asymptomatic during that period. I'm assuming that the man is being reinfected by mosquitoes every so often, especially if other people in the village are being infected, and that is what is leading to the extended course. Liver failure, splenomegaly, and anemia would result from chronic infection. The darkened skin may just be his manifestation of jaundice, since it would take on the classical yellow skin in a darker-skinned person. Babesiosis is less likely, since I don't believe it is endemic in India. It can cause hepatomegaly, splenomegaly, jaundice, etc. However, I am unaware of anyone carrying it for more than a year. Furthermore, it is unlikely to be severe unless there is a predisposing factor, such as a previous splenectomy or immunodeficiency. Ehrlichiosis and anaplasmosis, same as Babesia, in that I don't think it's endemic to India, and I'm unaware of any case lasting so long. The next step I would take is to look at a blood smear. All of these would be diagnosable by directly seeing the parasites. Treatment for Babesia and the other tick-borne parasites would be with doxycycline. If it is malaria, then the use of primaquine is necessary to clear out the liver hypnozoites. Other diagnoses, leptospirosis. can be obtained by coming into contact of the infected animal's urine, can lead to liver failure and undulating fever, although I don't believe it is tertian, but not the splenomegaly. I absolutely would not last for 16 years. Adult onset Still's disease. The fever is classically daily or every twice daily. Are you going to pronounce this for me?
Quotidian.
Quotidian or double quotidian?
Quotidian, yeah.
There is hepatomegaly in a minority of patients, but most do have splenomegaly. There was also a macular-papular rash, which once again would have a variable presentation depending on our patient's skin color. There is an elevation of liver enzymes. Overall, this fits well with the vignette. The problems are that the patient would be suffering from many more problems, kidney damage, TTP, etc., than this, and especially if it has been going on for 16 years. Hemochromatosis. Admittedly, this was my immediate thought as you were going through the vignette and mentioned liver failure with darkening of the skin. Unfortunately, it shouldn't cause fevers on its own. Diagnosis unrelated stuff, arsenic poisoning. I've heard that arsenic poisoning can cause a patient to have garlic breath. Is it really noticeable? I always thought of myself as a curious person, but actually testing this one out is crossing a line. Eosinophilic granulomatosis. Thank you for the correction. I usually have to remind myself of the change between Wegener's to granulomatosis with polyangiitis. Remember we talked about that on the prior episode?
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, I'm sort of in favor of no longer maintaining, the names of Nazis associated with diagnoses. Exactly. All right, longest fast ever. The longest, I think these are just esoteric things. Longest fast ever. The longest confirmed record for a fast is 382 days.
Really?
It was a 27-year-old man, and you can find the paper here, and he gives us a link. He was given water and vitamins, so he was relatively okay.
Relatively okay.
Well, yeah, no.
The paper claims that there were no ill effects to the patient in the long term. However, I find that really hard to believe.
Yeah.
Given the permanent changes that occur in children's GI tracts when they are marasmic. Overall, I would not recommend this as a diet for weight loss or to remove worms. Thank you all again for your hard work.
So
should I comment on some of these things? Because there was a lot in there.
Last time someone had asked if you could cure a worm infection by starvation. Yeah. So I guess this would for 300 some odd days.
The problem with this diagnosis, if you don't mind me just jumping in for the...
Jump in, because you're talking about 5X, right? You're going to hit primary...
No, I'm going to talk about overdiagnosis, because if you were to run all the tests for all these diseases, this guy would go broke. You can't do that. You have to be more pointed in your diagnosis.
Oh, he's giving us a differential.
Yeah, but that's a very, 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 very large differential, don't you think?
He's a medical student. He wants to exercise all of his facilities.
We have a course here that actually teaches you how to pare down your diagnosis, and money. Yeah. The cost of the diagnosis is thrown into the mix to actually use as a...
Well, you know what, Dickson, I think he's just thinking aloud with us.
No, but
he knows
of course he is. And medical students would come up with a lot of things like that. And then it's good that they should know about them. But if you go into medical practice, your patients can't afford that kind of battery of tests.
You're among friends, Joseph. This is good. I like that. I like the differential diagnosis.
No, it's fine. It's
comments,
fine.
Daniel?
Well, he talks about Plasmodium vivax, right? He talks about malaria. And I think that when you say tropics, fever, splenomegaly, the first thing on your list should be malaria. And you know what? There's no reason why this guy can't have malaria and something else, right?
That's very, very true. No, that's absolutely right, because inevitably, if they live in an endemic area for many things, they will have many things before the day is out.
Yeah, so I would start with that and saying, okay, I'm not sure that malaria is going to explain everything in this case. And there are certain qualities of this case that are going to suggest another diagnosis. But keep that in mind. Whenever you see someone from the tropics, it's malaria until you have a negative blood smear.
All right.
And then once you have a negative blood smear or you've dealt with malaria, it may also be something else. Remember Occam, I don't know where Occam practiced medicine, but he's the guy who thought there was only one diagnosis. But often in the tropics, it's malnutrition, malaria, and a third thing.
Right.
And then I say he makes good points about babesiosis or ehrlichiosis, anaplasma, not endemic in this area. So, the thing you would treat in India would be scrub typhus. So, Tutsugami.
He never mentioned undulating fever, which could give you a double daily spike, but...
and it's interesting the way you count the days, right? In malaria,
it's true.
It's
it's true.
You start on day 1, and so when you have a fever, the next day it's day 2.
That's right.
And so it gets a little confusing, the tertian quotidian fevers. But
Here.
We'll leave that. Leptospirosis. We'll just kind of move past that. I usually, when I've seen leptospirosis, and I have seen, you realize leptospirosis is endemic here.
It is.
We had a gentleman working on the rebuild after 9/11, and he ended up getting infected from rat urine working down in the site there. It was actually written up. And we vaccinate our dogs because it's in the streams in the neighborhoods. So it's leptospirosis. There was a big outbreak in Illinois. People swimming, triathlon out there. Usually you do get liver failure. Wheals is the syndrome when you actually get that severe liver failure. It tends to be much more of an acute, not a 16-year process. Exactly. And there's this undulating fever, but if anything, the severity kind of diminishes over time. So big spike, littler spike, kind of a adult onset Still's disease. This is actually an autoimmune inflammatory disease. And so there's the triad of the fever and the joint pains usually. They can get large spleens. And they describe it as the salmon-colored rash. This is like on every infectious disease board as the non-infectious disease thing to worry about. Right. Tend to have really high ferritins, which sort of leads you into the hemochromatosis they mentions next. So, it's interesting to have it in there, but he wouldn't make it on TWiP. Hemochromatosis, interesting, has a higher frequency in Caucasians. It's a genetic disease where tend to have an increased iron uptake, and you can end up with darkening of the skin, hypogonadism, and again, you see these elevated ferritin levels. And then he just mentions those other kind of fun things.
All right. The next one is from Jeremiah, who simply writes, Kala Azar. And the next is from Dr. Wink, who writes, Dear TWiP professors, great episode, as they say on Monday Night TV. 107 was your best dance yet.
Okay.
Is that what they say, Dickson? Because I don't watch TV.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
My guess for the chronically ill man from Assam is tertian malaria due to P. vivax. Best regards, Wink Weinberg. Dickson, you can take Alice's.
Alice or Alice
I don't know.
Writes,
Alice.
Dear TWiP trifecta, I hope this finds you all well, and Dr. Griffin, I hope very much that your mother has recovered without mystery from whatever undermined her evening at the opera.
Mm-hmm.
After a wave of super cold days, it is now just chilly in lower Manhattan, 49 degrees Fahrenheit, 9.4 degrees centigrade, but it's sunny. I'm very sorry to have missed responding to TWiP 106, although I really don't think I would have gotten the correct diagnosis. I seem to be in a very hectic moment. Having that, I recently had a somewhat embarrassing moment, parasite-wise. At the gym, a woman I know slightly was on the phone discussing what was clearly a parasitic infection in her child, and I think my head swiveled around a little too fast. I was very sympathetic with her plight and told her that I happened to be very interested in parasitic diseases and that I was exactly the person she should talk to about this without fear of me getting squickened out. Squicked? How do you pronounce that?
Squicked.
Squicked. Okay.
It's squicked with an S.
Squeamed, maybe squeamed. Okay, fine. She seemed relieved, but I suspected she now thinks I'm a bit peculiar. I think I provided a service because it can be difficult for parents to find non-squeamish ears to talk about these things.
A bit peculiar. I like that phrase. Hey, Dickson, are you a bit peculiar?
Oh, absolutely. By every definition of that word. I do have a guess diagnosis for TWiP 107. I think the farmer in Assam may have been suffering for a very long time from Kala Azar, or a visceral leishmaniasis. It is caused by a protozoan that spread to human hosts through sandfly bites. Unfortunately, this is not an uncommon disease in India, though it shows up as well in parts of Africa and South America. And I did find an interesting case study of a Sicilian patient who was initially misdiagnosed as having cirrhosis of the liver. Visceral leishmaniasis is fascinating in its progression because it can be almost symptomless for a long time, or it can kill a patient within a couple of years. Its symptoms are consistent with the patient's enlarged spleen and liver, recurring fevers, loss of appetite and weight, and most curiously, skin on the face, hands, feet, and abdomen can become darker. This change in skin color is the source of the Indian name Kala Azar, which means black fever. There are lots of other diseases that could participate in the differential diagnosis. Cirrhosis, as I mentioned, is a possible suspect, as is malaria. Remember, he could have two things, right? Visceral Leishmaniasis is treatable, but I wonder, after 16 years of having put up with countless protozoa, if the patient's liver and spleen can recover entirely. Apparently, treatment is not as easy and requires a long course of medication that can be difficult to acquire and maintain in rural areas, which makes me worry about the patient even more. Please let us know what his progress is. As always, thank you so much, and I wish you all the best.
Daniel.
Okay. David writes, Dear TWiP Trio, the 45-year-old gentleman from Assam seems to have a contracted classic textbook case of malaria, particularly Plasmodium falciparum. The patient's recurrent fever, 36 to 48 hours, is symbolic of malaria infection, and the hepatosplenomegaly described may be a cause of his abdominal pain. Hepatosplenomegaly and jaundice in the man's eyes and skin are all telltale signs of the sporozoites and merozoites in the liver, and there has been documentation of elevated bilirubin levels due to the infection, the breakdown of hemoglobin that the parasites incur. The high elevation of liver enzymes is also a sign of disease progression. I am glad to announce to the TWiP team that I've been accepted to the Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine at Tufts, a PhD candidate in the molecular helminthology lab, where I'll be studying the tegmental proteins and host parasite interactions of schistosomes. I am very excited, and I am sure TWiP will come in handy during the process.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, that's a great school, and I wish you all the success.
Yeah, I wonder who he's going to be studying with, doing research under.
Yeah,
well,
me too.
I am sure we will hear about it over
Dave,
the years.
you must email us and let us know.
Yeah.
You can introduce TWiP to the lab also.
Here.
Yes, that's good. Spread the joy.
That's right.
Ruben writes, TWiP 107, a man from Assam. A man from Assam. I could make it rhyme, but that
Sounds
wouldn't
like
be
the
correct.
beginning of a Dr. Seuss book.
Dear para-entertainers. That's interesting.
Yeah.
After a home run with the TWiP 102 Indian woman from Calcutta case, I am compelled to expose my ignorance again. It seems that this 45-year-old gentleman got a bad case of Kala Azar, also known as black sickness, black or dum-dum fever, or visceral leishmaniasis. In fact, the local names of the disease tell his story in clear and unambiguous terms. The visceral form of the disease, caused by Leishmania donovani, affects spleen and liver and is life-threatening. It must be his healthy lifestyle that kept him alive for 16 years. Treatment options for visceral leishmaniasis are not straightforward issues with toxicity, efficacy, and cost. Liposomal amphotericin B, expensive, and short-course miltefosine and or paromomycin sulfate is an option. Pentavalent antimonials would not be my first choice. Of course, it is always possible that I am completely wrong on all counts. Not a big fan of the weather discussions, but a huge fan of the TWiP geniuses. Ruben is a professor at UCSD. Actually, we didn't even talk about the weather today.
Yeah, that's okay.
But wait a minute, at UCSD, they don't have weather. It's all the same.
That's why he doesn't like it.
Probably.
Thank you, Ruben.
Right.
We are not geniuses.
No,
I am
that's
not.
for sure.
Do you want to be a genius?
I'm
not.
I might have wanted to.
Are you, Daniel?
I was going to focus on I agree with less discussion of weather, more discussion of parasites.
We don't really discuss weather. What we say at the beginning is...
We just give a little thumbnail sketch, that's all.
It's a beautiful day today.
It is. So Chris writes, hello, TWiPers. I've been hooked on all the Twix podcasts for a while, and I really enjoy learning about these fields in medicine/biology. I went to school for chemistry, but now regret not spending more time on biology or biochemistry. That's okay, though. Twix to the rescue. This is the first time I've tried to figure out a case study. At first, I thought it was a slam dunk with one Google search. The 2-day periodic fever was most striking to me and seemed to be most associated with malaria, particularly P. vivax or P. ovale. I then tried to find common parasites to the Assam region and ruled out several, leaving Echinococcus, tapeworm, malaria, and Leishmaniasis, or Leishmania. Great, malaria is still on the list. I was very focused on this fever, and malaria explained that, and also the enlarged spleen and liver. I couldn't really find other case studies of such a long-term infection, but I thought maybe there was some kind of immunity involved that kept the disease somewhat in check, i.e. the patient was able to survive for so long. I was about to call it a day, but I didn't like that I couldn't find the darkening skin as a symptom of malaria on any article or website, so I went further down the rabbit hole. I kept the Echinococcus tapeworm on the list because it could have a year-long incubation and cause jaundice. However, there were too many symptoms not accounted for to consider this further. Then I read about Leishmaniasis and came across why it's sometimes called black fever. There is the darkening skin. Also, the liver and spleen are specifically listed as becoming enlarged with visceral Leishmaniasis. Periodic fever? Check. This disease is often mistaken for malaria as well. Uh-oh, now I don't know what to pick. Leishmaniasis seems to be very deadly if untreated, and this man has been sick for 16 years already. After much internal debate and finding one case study of a Nepalese man infected with both malaria and Leishmaniasis, my guess is the patient has malaria and, more recently, Leishmaniasis. I feel pretty good about my first try at this. I'm looking forward to the next podcast so I can learn about which details I've overlooked that could have made a difference in my analysis. All the best, Chris from Massachusetts.
How interesting. A double infection.
Well then.
Interesting.
Yes, indeed.
I know. Does that make you worry, Dickson?
No, not even a little bit. No, I'm not concerned.
You don't like a double infection, Dickson?
I do. I like double infections. I've been involved in them as a technician and as a reporter of a finding by a medical student or one of the clinicians here at PNS. It's very possible, but this guy has been able to work. He's been in the field. He's been working. He's not laid up. Somebody with a double infection might not be able to even move for a while. And I think, although Vivax and Ovale wouldn't be part of this diagnosis, but Vivax would, I think the chances are that he's got just one thing.
All right, so Daniel, he's going out on the limb.
But of course,
yes,
we need a lab diagnosis.
Let's do something. Yeah, let's get some more information.
Exactly right.
Yes. No, you're right about we need a lab. I have like my list of little quotations, and one of them is about what a clinician without a lab is.
Right.
And you need a lab. And I think we've learned that. We always say that, the diagnosis is all in the history. It's not all in the history.
That's right. That's right.
You do need lab confirmation. Otherwise, as years go by, you might get farther and farther off target and there's no correction.
You bet. So I've never understood malaria as causing hepatosplenomegaly. I know it causes splenomegaly, but I've never heard the word hepato brought into the play when you're describing that. So I would have ruled that out. And the darkening of the skin, if he had, let's say, malaria and arsenic poisoning, which can darken your skin and cause your hair to become brittle and your fingernails become brittle, and it is in that part of the world for sure because it's in Bangladesh. Bangladesh used to be called East Pakistan, and Assam is right next to it, so I assume that they've got runoff from the Himalayas that's arsenic-laced as well. It still doesn't fit this diagnosis. So.
Okay.
Onward and upward.
Labs.
What about Vincent? Did you have any? Did you want to jump in? Are you going to concur with Dickson?
A me tour?
He's got a compelling argument, right? I mean, I do feel that Kala Azar is right. I don't know about a double infection. Yeah. That's a new one for me, so I'm not going to go there because I heard this guy say it. And
that's fair.
All right.
That's absolutely fair.
But I'm no genius.
When it comes to polio, I wouldn't agree.
No, I'm not a genius. No, I'm not a genius at all. Genius is Einstein.
Yeah, but that's physics.
And Stephen Hawking.
Yeah, that's physics.
Can you name a genius in parasitology besides yourself?
I think Patrick Manson. No, I wasn't a genius ever. Patrick Manson, I thought, was a genius.
Really?
Yeah, because he lived in the old days and he had to fill in a lot of blanks to fill in the life cycles, and he was right.
Mansoni, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think some of his insights, right, when he was
terrific.
Not only was he discovering stuff, but he would have conversations like, you need to look here, and he'd be right.
And who else was like that? It was Ronald Ross. So we got two of them.
I think say Ronald Reagan.
No, Ronald Ross. Ronald Ross, who purposefully did not study in medical school so that he could have more time for other things. He aimed for a C. And he was obviously a winner of a Nobel Prize and later on became Sir Ronald Ross and all that stuff. So getting A's in school doesn't always ensure your success in the future.
True. We know that.
Joseph, don't listen to him. Get good grades in medical school.
But if you don't, you better be as smart
if you
as
don't, then you might win a Nobel Prize.
There haven't been too many people that smart. So
yeah. So I'm gonna say I think that your argument is compelling. And we're on the wards a month or so ago, and I was bringing up the issue of the spleen versus the liver versus both.
Yeah.
And it is the large spleen is fairly classic for malaria. So
it is.
And there's actually WHO criteria because a lot of places don't have microscopes. So microscope is an expensive thing. Yeah. So there's actually WHO clinical criteria for the fever, the right endemnicity, and a large spleen. And
sometimes it's called big spleen disease. In Africa, it's known as big spleen disease.
Or tropical splenomegaly. They used to call it. Some people, I'm sure, still refer to it as that.
It's an easy non-laboratory diagnosis. If the area is known to be endemic for malaria, you can tell when the epidemic is occurring by how many people have enlarged spleens. But as your immune system fights off the infection and as the immunity takes over and limits the parasitemia, the spleen size goes down again. Mm-hmm. So that's an annual thing. It's not always there.
Right.
Which would have thrown me off on this one, too.
I should say, though, there is the exception. So when I say tropical splenomegaly, there's an acute splenic enlargement with acute malaria. But there's also a chronic immune hyperactivation that leads to a chronically enlarged spleen in a subset of individuals.
Right.
And they have a sort of an exuberant immune system relative to the amount of parasites. But again, just the spleen. So point taken. Yeah. The large liver, we start thinking of other things, such as schistosomiasis, not endemic in Assam.
Exactly.
Leishmaniasis, endemic in Assam.
That's right.
And actually what's even cuter, right, is we keep mentioning this word Kala-Azar. And Kala-Azar, actually, where does that come from? And I brought notes because I introduced this to our latest version. It actually, it's not Hindu. It's actually from the Assam dialect of Hindustani.
Wow.
Yeah, so I made sure we have that in our new version. So it's actually from
new version of what?
Daniel? Of parasitic diseases.
Aha!
6th edition. Right. So actually in Assamese, the word Kala refers to black and Azar refers to sickness or fever.
Yeah. Where is the town of Dum Dum, by the way? Is that in Assam Valley also?
I don't know.
Because it's known as Dum Dum fever in some places.
One of our writers, Ruben, wrote.
That's right. And the British actually applied that name to the people with this infection. Yeah.
Okay.
And remember who discovered it? A Scotsman and an Englishman, Leishman and Donovan. And guess who named the parasite? It was this genius, Sir Ronald Ross, who put it together and said, this is the same organism. Let's call it
both
Leishmania.
Donovani.
Yeah, they both submitted the papers, and he looked at them and said, guys, you're describing the same thing.
An Englishman and what?
And a Scotsman.
So an Englishman and a Scotsman walk into a bar.
That's right. No, walk into a ward.
Okay.
No, I think the joke is an Irishman walks out of a bar.
It happens.
It happens.
Well, these guys are going to...
We don't want to insult.
We're going to get mail on this. We're going to get mail on
I don't think any Irish, or at least
Irish
do not. I don't
Irish
think so.
do not mind being
maligned.
Joked about the fact that we enjoy certain things.
Labs.
Yeah, so here were the interesting issues on this man. So he did have the blood smear, of course. Yeah. Because you got to make sure he doesn't have malaria. He's got fever, he's sick, and it was negative for malaria parasites.
Okay.
Which actually was good, right? This was during the rainy season. But then they did something right away, and they did this thing called an RK39 dipstick.
Of course they did.
Has anyone heard about that?
No.
And this is actually, it's a great...
I'm old
new
school.
rapid flow. It's a lateral flow test, basically like a pregnancy test. I remember the first time I heard lateral flow test, I was like, what is that? Like, it's a pregnancy test type. And so the assay is basically it's an ELISA. It's an antigen ELISA. So you're testing for a particular antigen that's present in the Leishmania. And you can do it point of care, and the blood runs out on it, and basically you get the lines.
How about
just like a pregnancy test, and you see he's got the Leishmania antigens there.
Got it.
So that was initially done, and that was positive. And then what did he have next?
And by the way, it's the R39 test is Googleable, and one of the hits is called the name of this test for one company. It's Kala-Azar Detect.
How about that?
One word, Kala-Azar Detect. Isn't that funny?
How about that?
Wow.
And it's nice. There's one for urine, right? Just like the pregnancy test. There's
Yeah.
one for serum that you can just, I
Nice.
have some pictures of some. I'll show you.
Got it.
But they're nice. It really looks just like a pregnancy test. And you either
Right.
put a little bit of blood or you put a little bit of urine in there. And 10 minutes later, you read it. I think 10 to 20 minutes, there's a time.
And this is checking for the antigen?
So this is actually not looking for the immune response. It's actually checking for the antigen. not the
Okay,
lymphocytes.
so that means the organism has to be there then.
Exactly.
Yep.
And very high sensitivity, specificity. It's used all over the place.
This one is antibodies, actually. So Calazar is antibodies.
This is antibodies?
It says detection of visceral leishmaniasis antibody in human serum.
Antibodies. So
So they're using the RK39 as the antigen, and they're detecting antibodies?
Okay, so he could have been exposed, but he still could have been suffering from something else because it's not definitive.
That's true. So they did the next thing, which was a bone marrow
I was going to
aspirate.
say, of course.
And they did that for culture.
Through the iliac crest? No, really, that's where they usually get the bone marrow
Yeah,
from.
that is how it was done. And a few days later, it actually grew L. donovani
How
out.
about that?
But they actually did a PCR right away, which was positive as well.
Wow.
From a bone marrow aspirate. That is...
Wow.
Is it a definite way to get it?
So in certain places, right, you've probably heard they do splenic aspirates. And and you are right. They claim it's not, but actually it is dangerous. And what they would do is you take a syringe with a needle, you put it under the skin in just a little bit, and then you actually create like suction on the syringe. And then you have the person take a deep breath, and then you quickly go in and out of the spleen.
Wow.
And when you do that, about 1 in every 1,000 times you're going to rupture the spleen. And so people claim like, oh, I never have complications. But a lot of these areas, you could say you have no complications till someone comes and watches, and then they say, you know what, I'm going to follow everyone you did that on, and you realize that, yeah, you're getting. So what you can do, there's really no reason to do splenic aspirates. I'm going to suggest large volume bone marrows are just as sensitive.
Which bone would you go for, Danny?
Iliac crest is.
Iliac crest, okay.
Yeah.
And you said that before.
I did, yeah.
I was thinking of a crested iliac, which is a bird. It's endemic here. You notice I said endemic.
Yeah, right. That's okay. No, that's a right term. That's
Can a bird
speaking.
be endemic?
Absolutely. You can have endemic species. That's right.
Autochthonous species?
You can have autochthonous endemic species.
Cool. All right.
So, and then people probably want to know what he was treated with.
Yes.
Right. What was he treated with?
He was treated with amphotericin, not liposomal. Liposomal is really expensive.
Yeah, that's what Ruben said.
Absurdly expensive.
But there's a lot of side effects with non-liposomal, isn't there?
Yeah,
Now,
it's a
what's
lot
the
of
difference
kidney and fevers.
between liposomal and non-liposomal?
So the advantage of the liposomal, they actually create these liposomes, sort of little lipid delivery vehicles for the amphotericin. It ends up getting targeted to macrophages and basically where you want it. It has a lot less side effects, particularly the fevers, the shaking, chills, and rigors that you get, and the kidney toxicity. But it's really very costly. Some patients are getting it in India, and there's a lot of programs to try to help increase the accessibility. But
what happened to sodium stibogluconate? Where is that?
I think we had a discussion about the fact that there's a lot of resistance because of the arsenic in the water, maybe because of the arsenic in the water.
Okay.
But there's a lot of resistance in India, so it's not a great drug.
Got it. And so, according to one of our writers how did the patient do?
Yeah, he actually did well.
Excellent.
He stopped having fevers. His swelling went down.
Yeah, he started feeling better. His appetite got better.
How long did this take?
I think it was 3 weeks of treatment. So
wow, that's pretty good. What about the color in his skin?
It's going to probably take a while if it even really goes away.
Yeah.
And speaking of the skin, there's a very interesting skin manifestation, right, of Leishmaniasis.
Yeah.
I was looking at you. I thought you were this post-dermal. There was actually a patient I just left when I had gotten there. Sometimes these people will get better, right? You treat them, but then they have this recurrence where the Leishmaniasis gets in the skin and they become these super spreaders with this dermal Leishmaniasis.
Yeah.
And clinically, they can look a lot like leprosy patients.
Yep.
But you can actually do SNPs and PCRs and make the distinction between
You have
the
a
two.
nice image in your book of post-dermal Leishmaniasis.
Yeah, it's a terrible disfiguring disease. But after treatment, the patient returns to a normal appearance. It's a miracle. There's also a candidiasis infection that looks similar. They develop these papules that extend. They're almost like finger-like projections. It's really horrible and disfiguring. But after treatment, and it was thought in one time to be a T-cell deficiency. And so they had something called intrinsic factor. And if they transferred intrinsic factor, which was derived from lymphocytes, it would restore the ability of the body to actually fight the disease itself. Later on, that was shown to be something else, I think. But
yeah, you've mentioned this before.
In the old days, intrinsic factor has a history of, I think it's probably one of the interleukins. Not sure. Let's see what it says about that.
Well, intrinsic factor, also known as gastric intrinsic factor.
No, that's different. That's for
the
vitamin
glycoprotein,
B12.
Yeah, necessary for the absorption of vitamin B12.
Yeah, that's different.
That's different?
Yes. Egg whites, if you eat a lot of egg whites. It's egg whites, I think, isn't it, that wipes out intrinsic factor?
I remember we had this discussion before. I think
raw
this
eggs.
Is, back in the days of candles and
back in the day.
Oil. I don't know.
That's right. Louis Pasteur was ruling the roost.
Yes. So I'm not sure.
But intrinsic factor was an intermediate idea between a full understanding of what lymphocytes actually did and today's world of complex interleukin biology, which really is quite daunting in terms of learning it all.
Page 1 and 2 of Google all has the stomach intrinsic factor, and that's as far as we're going today because we need to
That's the end of that.
But before we move on, I would like to tell everyone about the ASM Scientific Writing and Publishing course, for which you can apply to attend if you are someone interested in learning about the whole process of writing and publishing. You're going to get one-on-one coaching from ASM journal editors and reviewers. You will get hands-on experience in critiquing abstracts and manuscripts and much more. You have to apply by June 30th to attend the course, which will take place at ASM headquarters in Washington, D.C., which is where I was last weekend. Very, very pretty place. It happens on August 12th through the 14th. You can learn more at bit.ly/ASM-SWPC16. We thank ASM for their support. TWiP. We have a paper for your enjoyment.
And ours too, by the way.
I hope everyone enjoyed that case. That's one of my favorite cases.
I love the case.
I like the nice outcome.
And I love the paper that you selected also.
The man should be very happy that he was saved. Now, let me ask you one last thing.
Yeah.
If left untreated, what would have happened to him?
Good question.
It's interesting. These diseases can go on for a long period of time. It's one of those things where people often say you die with it as opposed to from it, but I don't know if that's really true. I think there's an immune suppression that comes with this, so it makes you much more vulnerable to other things. As we mentioned, if this man got infected with malaria, which he's high risk for,
sure.
It could be fatal because of the effects. So yeah, people do not do particularly well. I think, what is it, 400,000, really enormous number of people infected and dying from this throughout the world.
Yeah.
Huge problem.
And it's really too bad, though. When you mentioned the fact that he was surrounded by dogs can be the reservoir host for this parasite, by the way.
Yeah, actually, in different areas, you have different reservoirs. And in India, it's the dog is the big one.
Yeah, that's right. We should have mentioned that.
Curiously, our paper has to do with Leishmania.
Doesn't it, though?
Wow, what a coincidence.
There's a little character here.
Yeah, how about that? It is an article called In Vivo and In Vitro Phagocytosis of Leishmania Emozenensis, Promastigotes by B1 Cells, the B1 bomber.
Exactly.
Very expensive piece of equipment. And this is coming out of São Paulo, Brazil.
Yes.
And the first author is Mariana Marquez Geraldo, and the last author is Patricia Zander. Why are you tilting your head?
No, but because I'm just, I love Brazilian music. I love the whole samba thing. And so
do you like that
when
drink?
When you mention Brazilian...
What's that drink called? Cachaques or something?
No, you make it out of...
What is that called?
I forget. It's made out of sugar cane, and it's a way of catching Chagas disease, and I wouldn't drink it, unfortunately.
A way of catching Chagas?
Stay away from
Why
it.
would you catch Chagas from it?
Because it's made from crushed sugar cane.
And what's in the sugar cane?
Well, sometimes there's a reduvid bug.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes, really.
So you would eat the reduvid or the extract of it?
You would eat it, you would drink it.
And what form would you get from the reduvid?
You would get the metacyclic tripomastigotes.
Metacyclic tripomastigotes. It's a good name for a rock band.
That's
Do you have any musical talent?
The tripomastigotes present for your listening pleasure.
Yeah, no, I think we talked about this previously.
Yeah, we did.
Because there's this concern that when you tell a patient they have Chagas, it's considered a disease of poverty. but there have been several of these large oral outbreaks. And that's sort of put forth as, you could have gotten it from drinking a fancy drink.
That's right.
And so you don't have to associate Chagas with poverty.
Exactly right. So
now
Leishmania amazonensis
yes,
is a variety of cutaneous leishmaniasis.
And where would you get this?
Well, you get
Brazil?
them in the Amazon.
The Amazon.
There's a strain of Leishmania.
What spreads it?
Sandflies.
Sandflies?
Leutzemia.
I got it.
So
sandflies. Also in India, sandflies as well?
Oh, yes, but a different one. Those are phlebotomine.
Phlebotomine sandflies.
That's right.
And they're not phlebotomine here in Brazil?
They're different.
I say here in the
but the New World,
sense.
Here in the New World.
Well, New World,
sandflies are Leutzemia. The Old World sandflies are phlebotomine.
This Earth, as far as I know, was all created at the same time. Right?
Yeah, that's true. That's
from molten rocks. But
you're quite right.
The New and Old World is a product of exploration.
But I think that's exactly why.
B1 cells intrigued me when Daniel suggested this because I hadn't heard much about them.
Exactly right.
Did you know anything about B1 cells?
Not until I met him.
And, well,
now I know so much about B1 cells that
they're not actually considered part of the adaptive immune system. They have no memory, right?
That's controversial.
Is it controversial?
It is controversial.
If there are memory B1 cells?
Yes.
Interesting.
I'll be darned.
But they're thought to make antibodies against certain immunogens only, like polysaccharides. Right.
Yeah. The theory
carbohydrates
and the core, and everything varies a little from the theory. The idea of B1 cells is that their repertoire, their targeting. So think of them as B cells. They're going to produce antibodies mainly, but the antibodies they produce are selected through evolutionary time. Mm-hmm. So we human beings, as well as sharks and all animals between, have these B1 cells, and they have a repertoire that targets things like.
So they make them without needing to be stimulated by antigen. Is that the idea?
They already are pre-programmed to release these. They're primed. And 90% of the circulating IgM antibodies in our system come from, we believe, the B1 cells.
I'll be darned.
But the B1 cells, as you see here, are not just B cells.
Yeah.
They have this odd macrophage differentiation potential.
They can phagocytose. A B cell. Now, a regular B cell that undergoes antigenic stimulation and proliferation, they don't phagocytose, right?
The most they can do is pinocytose. Little pinches,
a little bit of cellular drinking,
yes.
Pinocytosis. That's very interesting. With immunology, you can always learn something new, Dickson. Also with microbiology, as you know.
No question.
Now, here's what I know about these natural antibodies. This is a very interesting story with viruses. In your gut, you have bacteria that produce a certain kind of sugar that it's not present on your own cells. You make antibodies against it. And then when you are infected with a virus that comes from an animal, a non-human animal, it will have this sugar on it. And you immediately have antibodies that can bind to those viruses because they're always present in high levels of
so they're trapped in the mucus? Is that what happens to them?
No, they could be in your blood as well. But this is why many animal viruses do not infect people, because they're immediately...
I see.
And this is sort of an innate immune defense, because we think of adaptive as requiring a few weeks for production of something tailored to the pathogen. But this is there, and it collaborates with complement to...
Okay, so that leads into this article as well.
Yeah, I like to demean the B2 cells. They're like the modern doctor.
The B2.
You call up the B2 cells, or the doctor. You say, "I'm really sick." They say, "Well, we can get you in a week or two." You're like, "I'll be dead in a week or two." Why don't you do something to hold yourself over? Call a B1 cell.
Now, as far as I understand,
that's the emergency ward.
Yes,
we don't really understand what the phagocytic properties of these cells is. What's that good for in our immune response?
Yeah, we're just learning about that.
But people have them, and obviously in this paper, mice have them, right?
Mm-hmm. But when we talk about phagocytosis here, I think it's a participation among the receptors of the cell and the ligands of the parasites. And it might be an active process rather than a passive process on the part of these parasites because of what happens after they get inside the cells.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in this paper, which is in TypeScript form still because it's not come out yet, right?
It is just accepted article.
This is hot off
the press, as they will say,
or hot going onto the press. Actually,
it's a number of rather straightforward experiments. I would say
very straightforward.
So basically, they in one set of experiments. So these are apparently these B1 cells are present in the peritoneal cavity.
Or you can induce them to come into the peritoneum.
How do you do that?
I think they live there. I mean, if you want to get these, the places where you find them in the highest density is going to be in mucosal or serous locations. So when you take that little bit of fluid that is in the almost potential space in the peritoneum, you can lavage out from a single mouse somewhere between 500,000 to 1 million B1 cells from in there. They're also probably concentrated in the gastric mucosa.
What you said reminds me. We used to inject mice with thioglycolate to induce macrophages, right?
Sure.
Then you would take out.
That's right. Or saline. You
saline too.
Saline too. That's right.
Well, they they take cells out of the cavity and they culture them to obtain B1 cells, and then they simply infect them. Now, Dickson, they use promastigotes.
Right.
Why?
Well, because that's the stage that is produced by the sandfly.
Okay.
That it injects into the bite wound that initiates the infection.
And then they put these on cover slips and look at them. They stain them, and they can see the promastigotes within the B1 cells, right?
Well, so actually, no, they don't see promastigotes inside the B1 cells. They see amastigotes inside the B1 cells.
Why is that?
Because it transforms once it gets into the cell immediately. It drops its flagellum.
That's why the A there, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
And the mast, think of a mast on a sailboat. That's right. The flagella. So they're now
He's a sailor. He is a sailor. So you have these little T-shaped configurations inside each organism, and it represents the kinetoplast and the remnant of the flagellum.
Okay.
These little T-shaped.
Amastigotes, that's right. But these B1s, they see more in them than in macrophages.
They do.
These are professional phagocytic cells, right?
This is incredible.
Like you said before, there may be some specificity to this,
that's
right?
That's right. So, Daniel, I'm uninformed with regards to the skin and the presence of B1 cells. Would you say that they're there too, or were we looking at dendritic cells instead?
No, and interesting enough, in the skin, I don't think we think of there being large numbers of B1 cells, if any. Actually, I don't think it's been described there. So if you think about the life cycle of Leishmaniasis, right? You're getting bit. It's just good. The bite is usually on the skin of an animal or man.
That's right.
And then they're going to get into the interstitial space. And then the first cells they usually come in contact with, I think we discussed previously, are going to be your dendritic cells and your macrophages.
That's right.
Now, once they get to lymph nodes, then maybe you're going to start seeing different.
Do we know if these get into dendritic cells?
We do know that.
They get in?
Yeah, I actually knew someone who was looking at that, Suzanne Holmes-Giannini, who was in our lab group when we were a division of tropical medicine. And she spent her whole professional life looking at the initial infection stages for Leishmania tropica. And as it goes into the dendritic cells, that's the cell that then goes on and distributes the organism to other parts of the body.
Including lymph nodes.
Including lymph nodes.
Why don't we have a tropical medicine division any longer here?
Gee, that's a great question.
You don't know?
Oh, no, I know what happened to it, but I can't tell you why we don't still have one.
Because, the fellow in McGill, he's head of the Tropical Medicine Institute, right? Why don't we have one here? Daniel should be the head of it if we do have one, don't you think?
That's true.
Would you like to start one?
I've thought about it.
You have enough
but
to
you know
right?
what? I don't like to be the head of. I think when I was in my 30s,
there's too much
right?
responsibility.
But you were the head of something.
So I was
right?
in my 30s. I was already chief of medicine of an academic medical center in Colorado, but I did not like it. No. I actually like taking care of patients. I like getting my hands dirty. I like doing research at the bench.
Okay.
I do not like being an administrator.
I hear you. And there's tons of patients. I mean, it wasn't because there were a lack of patients coming from the tropics or going to the tropics and coming back with tropical problems. That's not why we disbanded this group, I don't think.
Okay.
So maybe someone wants to come here and run a tropical medicine, and I'll specifically work there.
I bet you could.
I'll do the work.
You know what?
Else can
if someone gave money, you could make one again.
You know what should be? Here's what I really think should happen.
I think the Despommier Tropical Medicine.
No, don't do that. Don't do that.
Let's do that, Daniel.
Stop.
Just to embarrass the man.
No, but New York City has how many medical schools?
A lot. Let's count them. Columbia, Einstein, Mount Sinai, NYU, Weill Cornell, Brooklyn. There's something in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah,
we have New York Medical College, but that's
right. That's in Valhalla.
You consider that New York City?
So
6.
So they should form a consortium and have an institute for the diagnosis and treatment of tropical diseases in one place in New York City that they refer their patients to. And that could be the equivalent of what we used to have. The city used to have a department of tropical medicine.
You want to be the director?
No way.
You've had enough?
No, I couldn't do that. I'm not a clinician, first of all, but not that I've had enough. I agree with Daniel. I think it requires a certain mindset to direct something like that.
I'm sorry for the diversion. I was
curious. Not at all. It was a good diversion.
Because you've spoken about that before, and it seems to me that... So there is no such named place in New York City.
There's no animal called
and we have so many people coming from tropical areas like they do at McGill.
No, we joke when I'm overseas. People are like, oh, but you live in the third world. Because there's so many immigrants that come to New York City. We see all these things.
At Columbia University, Daniel is the most important person when it comes to tropical diseases because you're the only one.
Well,
I think you're the only one.
Is that correct?
Tell him.
No, I mean, I would say, fortunately, some of my colleagues are quite knowledgeable.
But they're
probably listening.
In it.
They're probably listening, so that's why.
Yeah, they're you're gonna get me in trouble now.
You can't say it.
No, actually, I have to say some of them are quite knowledgeable. But no, it would be great. And Michael Libman, we talked about this. He was saying one of the advantages they have in Canada is they have this organized national health system, right. So they can can say, we need a Center for Tropical Medicine in New York, and they set up one center. What you end up, unfortunately, in New York City is each institution wants to do a little bit. Sure. And so you don't have 6 medical schools saying, 5 of them saying, okay, it won't be us, it'll be someone else, which is what you'd have to get.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
I know. But the city used to do this too, though. They used to actually have a city. They had 4 tropical disease diagnostic treatment clinics throughout the city that you could go to at any one time. So
when I was at Mount Sinai, Dickson, when I was at Mount Sinai as a graduate student,
right,
they did not have a parasitologist in residence. They used to have Dr. Brown come and give the lectures.
Correct. That is correct. Right? That is correct.
But because Mount Sinai is on 5th Avenue, they don't have anybody with tropical diseases.
Cornell is on 1st Avenue. And they don't have them over there either, but they still had a department. They had Ben Keene. Ben Keene was a wonderful tropical disease man. Yeah. And a lot of other people there with him, too. So he had a big department at one time.
What we actually have, I should make sure I don't leave her out, is we have a clinician, Chris Coyle.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
She's at Einstein.
That's right.
She's a dean of something up there. So I think you get paid money when you're a dean.
You do.
And she is actually a great resource. I was actually, when I was in India, I was with Chris. And she comes and does parasitic lectures here at Columbia.
She took my course.
That's right.
She took over my course.
She took over your course.
She did.
But no, and she is definitely a great resource.
And there are still some tropical disease people there at Einstein. Herbert Tanowitz is still there, and a few other people. So
Dickson, they wanted to know what receptors Leishmania use to get into B1 cells.
That's right.
Apparently, this is known for other cells.
It is.
One of them is the mannose receptor.
D-mannose, right?
D-mannose.
And CR3.
CR3. What is CR3?
CR3 is a complement receptor.
Yeah. Binds complement pathway. So the easy way to determine this is to use blockers, right?
Exactly.
So, Dickson, for a mannose receptor, what blocker would you use?
Just throw in mannose.
You can buy it from Sigma,
Of course.
But for a CR3, what would you use?
That's more difficult.
Can you just buy something that would?
Maybe Sigma sells it. I don't know. Is it available?
Monoclonal antibodies are,
yeah.
Or you block it with...
I think Sigma also sells that too. Or BD.
Complement receptors... Not this one, but others are virus receptors also. Cell receptors for virus. Yeah, they use a monoclonal that blocks. And in fact, they show that if you block either of these.
Right. So there's another similar case.
The entry goes down.
That's right. So there's
particularly mannose for the B1.
An organism.
Mannose is a big one. 100 millimolar, though. That's a lot of mannose.
It is.
Sweet tooth, these Leishmania.
So there's another organism. It's called Entamoeba histolytica, and it uses galactose as a receptor.
Daniel and I know. We've heard of Entamoeba.
No, but I think maybe some people out there don't know.
Oh, there are people listening?
So they can culture that organism too, and they throw in galactose. And you've got CHO cells,
Chinese
hamster ovary. That's right, cells. And these cells sit right next to eostolytica, and they're perfectly comfortable. It's like Daniel in the lion's den, as I wrote.
That was the name of his first.
So Daniel, that's
podcast. In the parasite den.
Daniel in the parasite den.
It was correct. A good title.
So in
Dickson, when these B1 cells take up Leishmania, they make cytokines.
They do.
In your favorite interleukins.
And TNF alpha.
TNF.
Tumor necrosis factor alpha.
And what does TNF do to cells?
Oh boy, it screws them up.
There's a receptor for TNF on cells, and when TNF binds, it causes apoptosis. Programmed
that screws them up.
Death. And that seems a little counterintuitive that you would make something to kill yourself. That's why they call it programmed cell death, because you get rid of the infected cell. Right?
Tumor necrosis. So you're killing off tumor cells.
Well, that's how it was originally discovered.
I remember.
But Dickson, when these promastigotes go into a cell and become amastigotes, what would happen next normally?
They would multiply.
They would multiply. Would they multiply in a B1 cell?
Sure.
Yes?
Absolutely.
They don't actually look at that here, right?
They didn't do those experiments here, no.
Yeah, you have to let them go longer than that to find that out. But
that would be interesting, because you want to know, inside the B1 cell, are they being killed or are they replicating? I think that's very interesting.
I saw multiply infected single B cells, so I wondered whether those had replicated while they were still there.
Could be. Dickson, so here's the idea. A B1 cell takes up a promastigote, the B1 cell makes TNF, and then it kills itself, which would get rid of the infection, or no? Would you release amastigotes?
You would release the amastigotes, and they'd go to the next cells.
So it's no good to kill yourself.
It might favor the parasite.
Maybe the parasite has actually evolved to benefit by production of TNF.
So it's another way of getting parasites to spread from host to host.
So we should take a TNF null mouse and see if the parasites
that would be a great idea.
Spread, right? That's why I think you need to come back to the lab.
All these experiments left undone.
Now, they make IL-10, right?
They do.
What does IL-10 do? It's involved in inflammation, I think. Is it a pro-inflammatory
we talked about it as being part of the Th2 style immune response. And it stimulates cells to do a lot of different things. It seems to be really important for B cells. And just for the B1 cells, at least in human, are unique in being the only B cells that are spontaneously producing IL-10. Mm-hmm. Any B cell can make IL-10, and it does it to help orchestrate the immune system. But but B1 cells actually just sitting there are chronically putting it out. And actually, as you see here, with and without,
it doesn't make any difference, right?
It doesn't make any difference. Here you could see with exposure to Leishmania. Can you pronounce that for me?
No.
Amazonensis.
Sure.
Whether it's there or not, they're making IL-10, right?
Yeah, but TNF goes up, right?
TNF does go up.
Interesting.
So maybe other things go up too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But the one thing that doesn't go up is the acidification of the parasitophorous vacuole, and that's why these parasites end up surviving.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on in an infected macrophage or B1 or other reticuloendothelial cells, which under ordinary circumstances would result in the dissolution of the pathogen.
Right.
But this guy has worked it all out. It's got a protease that inhibits the fusion of the membranes in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
It's got all kinds of weaponry that it uses at various stages of its replication cycle. So sounds a little bit like a very, 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 very large virus.
And we have some of those. We have viruses that are...
Yeah.
What's the size of these promastigotes?
Well, they're about 2 to 3 microns.
Microns? Well, so we have some...
They're a little bigger than a mimivirus.
Yeah, we have some big... We have 1.5 micron viruses.
That's right.
So, Dickson, so far, all this is done by taking B1s out of mice and putting them in culture. What would you like to see next?
Well, Vincent.
What would you like to see next?
Let's go in vivo, shall we?
You think that's important?
I do think it's important.
What's the question?
The question is, do the same cells get infected in vivo as in vitro?
Any scientist worth her salt would do that experiment, right?
And so they did.
Yeah. They infect the mice and then pull out the B1s and see if they have taken up. Exactly. And how would you infect mice to do this?
IP.
IP is fine?
Yeah, sure.
And then they wait a bit and you ask, can we see amastigotes now?
Exactly.
And what do they see?
Or they see infected B1 cells and macrophages too.
Yeah, so it happens in the mouse.
But you know what? If you infected these organisms, the route that they ordinarily go in, I wonder, then what would happen?
What would be the route by a sandfly? So you could just do a little subdermal, intradermal.
Intradermal, that's right.
Intradermal.
Intradermal.
That was actually, I thought, an interesting issue here, right?
That's right.
You raised the question that, okay, you've put them where the B1 cells are. Of course they're going to. But what if you put them in a natural infection where you still see B1 cells?
Do these mice recapitulate the entire cycle of infection?
They do.
They do. But you're always putting it IP, or do some people do intradermal?
Well, it depends on what your question is.
If you put intradermal promastigotes, would they go through the whole cycle?
They will. In fact, they will form a dermal lesion.
Okay. They
don't go much further than that because this is not a visceral form. This is a skin form, basically.
Right.
So
now, if this were a human, then a sandfly would come and take a blood meal and pick up more promastigotes.
But it couldn't do it unless it was at the edge of the large lesion that
this is not viremia.
No.
Parasitemia. Yeah.
That's right. Same deal.
Yeah, maybe this is a good chance just to sort of get our review or get our listeners on board with sort of refreshed what Leishmania. So there's the two major forms, we'll say, with Leishmaniasis. There's the form that our man from Assam had, which is a visceral, where it's in your lymph nodes and your spleen and all throughout your whole body.
Correct.
And then there's this cutaneous/mucocutaneous form. Those are your two major forms. And most of your cutaneous Leishmaniasis, like Amazonensis and Peruviano and a number of others, Mexicana,
Panamanensis,
are you get bitten by the sandfly, and there's a lesion, an ulcer, and actually there's often several centimeters out from that are where the Leishmania organisms are.
Edge of the lesion, that's true.
And when the sandflies bite there, they can actually take them up and then spread them to the next victim.
That's right.
So is there any attraction of the sandfly to a lesion, or is it random?
Good question. That's a great question.
Maybe there's some chemical
I think flies, I think most people have had this. If you have an open wound, that's where the flies are. They go to the flies. No, there's an attraction. So these can be quite, what we talked about, the pizza pie, open wounds.
That's right.
It's because it's moist. You ever see a cow? They always have flies in their eyes. Poor animals, because it's moist, right?
And the lions,
and they can't get rid of them. They're blinking like crazy, and they come off and they go right.
Trachoma is carried that way. That's trachoma virus, or the trachoma organism, I should say. It's a mycoplasma-like organism. There's another form of Leishmaniasis called visceralizing cutaneous Leishmaniasis. So in certain circumstances, depending on the host, I think, rather than the parasite starts out as a lesion, but it can then visceralize. And so in Operation Desert Storm, a lot of our troops acquired Leishmania tropica, which was the old world form of this disease, and it visceralized because they're abnormal hosts. Their immune system isn't adjusted to that particular pattern.
Was this anticipated that they would?
No, they had no clue.
Why? Why not?
That's a good question. Because we don't train people in tropical
No,
medicine.
I think it was because it was a different genetic context. In those areas, they don't see that visceralizing. It's a cutaneous form.
I see.
And so when people came back, it didn't make any sense because this was a disease that we hadn't really seen. And what you needed to do is you need to take the genetic background that we introduced in our soldiers, expose them to that organism,
and then see what happens.
And then you saw suddenly a new disease.
So guess what the consequence of that was? 600,000 people who had gone over to ostensibly fight and come back were not permitted to give blood from that point on in the rest of their lives. Now, in the Army, that's a tragic situation because in combat, who you're going to get to give blood, that's the guy over here that's still alive, right?
Wow.
So is
that a tough reasonable restriction?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Well, even if you treat them and you can't clear.
Yeah, but remember what Daniel was saying about resistance to sodium stibogluconate and all those other things. I think I wouldn't like to know that somebody's transferring.
Yeah, no, it's probably not. The worry is it's probably not a sterilizing treatment.
Okay. Wow.
Also true.
Well,
fascinating.
So I think we were back. We were on 4 before I sent it. And we had a beautiful picture of actually a B1 cell.
Yeah, they're gorgeous.
With intracellular amastigotes.
That's right. Now, how many of them?
What do you think in that one?
I see 4 or 5 there. So
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the question is, did it eat 5 or 6, or did they replicate it there?
You know,
You think it replicated?
Well, how long after they actually...
I think they're doing the time courses pretty quick. 8, 16, 24. I'm thinking that's prior to replication.
Well, it's on the edge.
Easy enough to find out. You just put one in each well, and you look at them every
single. You got to watch,
right?
Yeah.
This is true.
Interestingly, in mice, IL-10 does go up.
Yes.
When you give them...
No, they used balbinase.
Yeah, the cytokine response was different in vivo than it was in vitro earlier work.
Not every strain of mouse is susceptible, by the way.
Yeah. Well, that's basically it. So what does this mean, Daniel?
Right. I was going to ask that myself.
Yeah, what is it?
Now that we know that B1 cells can be infected, what does that say?
Well, I think we talked about the issue is that with Leishmaniasis, you worry about the fact that our current treatments are not sterilizing.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an issue with what cells are the Leishmania organisms getting into.
Right.
And, you say, oh, well, they're in the macrophages, the dendritic cells. But this fact that we have all these people that can't donate blood, where is there a reservoir? Is this actually...
Right. Yeah. And in fact, if you want to make new drugs, you want to know all the places where the parasite is so that you want to make sure the drug is going to a B1 cell.
Exactly.
But remember, this is cutaneous Leishmaniasis.
Yes, sir.
And they didn't do cutaneous work in this case. They did intraperitoneal
I think
work.
They should, yeah. I think
they should do skin work and then use the right drugs and see if, ketoconazole is a good drug against it.
This strain does not cause visceral.
Unless you inject it intraperitoneally.
Okay,
and
which
then
which they did here.
Sure,
right?
But ordinarily, if you injected it, if you scarified it into the skin, they would stay there.
Are there B1 cells in the skin?
Well, we just asked.
That's what we're saying. We don't think so. They're in the peritoneal cavity. They're in the pleural cavity. They're in the gastric mucosa. So they're in lymph nodes.
One of the things that happens when the promastigotes transform to amastigotes is that heat shock proteins turn on. Because there's a big difference in the temperature that the promastigotes grow at, which is 26 degrees versus 37 or 39 degrees, depending on the host. And so there is a obvious need for the parasite to protect its, I guess, genetic material. I think that's what heat shock genes tend to do. In this case, they're all turned on. Most of the HS heat shock 70 and 55, and I think there are some other numbered heat shock genes that all are upregulated when the parasite transforms to an amastigote. So, fascinating biology.
All right, speaking of fascinating,
yes,
let's get another fascinating
Oh, yes.
study.
Come on.
Okay.
Now, don't say this one's fun.
Well, the other one was fun because the guy recovered.
Yeah, I guess that makes it fun.
That makes it fun because
so if Daniel says it's not fun, then it means the person
it's not
died.
fun to have this for 16 years, though. That's for sure.
Unfortunately, I will say that. Fortunately, this person did not die. They got better, but they were really sick.
Okay,
right.
So we're going to do one more case from India, and then we'll next time we'll be moving to other locales. But this is 26-year-old male long-haul truck driver from the northern tiger country of India comes into the hospital in the end of the rainy season.
The northern
tiger. Tiger like those guys with stripes.
The Bengal region of India.
Okay, got it.
And people are very proud of their tigers, right? Didn't we saw a special on lions recently?
Oh, there was a northern Asian lion community in India, but the tigers are really endangered. They're too bad.
So he comes into the hospital at the end of the rainy season with 6 days of fever, chills, muscle aches, small loose stools, vomiting, trouble breathing, a dry cough, and decreased urine production. Okay.
Wow.
So
trouble breathing, a cough,
dehydrated,
trouble
not
breathing,
producing much urine.
And what about the urine?
Decreased urine production.
Okay.
But I'll say his big things is the loose stools, the belly pain, trouble breathing.
Got it.
Right. Fever, 6 days in a row.
And he's had fever. He reports that he's a long-haul truck driver, that he lives in a mud hut with a coconut leaf roof, right? We talked about this, right? This is below the level of means where you can afford a concrete house. This man is a mud hut with a coconut leaf roof. He reports that no one else has been sick.
No one else in his family?
And his family has been sick.
What does his family consist of?
He has a wife and 2 children. Yes, 2 boys, age 6 and 8.
Okay.
And he does report significant animal and insect exposure.
And he's on the road a lot, right?
He's on the road a lot. He actually says he travels all around India.
Wow, that's a dangerous occupation to begin with.
Is it?
You ever drive in India?
I've never been to India.
It's frightening. It's absolutely frightening. There are animals everywhere, domestic and otherwise. There are people everywhere, and they're right along the road, and these trucks are, cars are going at 60 miles.
My wife was in the airport in India, and she said a big cockroach was walking next to her, so she squished it, and everyone gave her a dirty look.
Well, they must have been Janes then.
So, no, you're right. You're driving down the highway. I was driving down the highway. It's foggy. It's dark. All of a sudden, the brakes get slammed on because there's a herd of cows in the middle of the road.
Or a working
in the middle
elephant.
of basically what would be their interstate. There's 65 mile per hour.
Driving at
100 kilometer per hour.
Is deadly.
Now, he goes away for how long on these long haul trips?
Various lengths of time.
Now,
multiple days. And then he'll just sleep in the back of the truck or across the seat.
Now, when he got sick, was after a long haul trip? During? Before? What? How did that timing work?
He had been on a long haul trip.
He got home.
And he got home and didn't feel well.
So as soon as he got home,
it was pretty recently, but he's always doing it. He's back and forth. So
did he say where he was just before he got sick?
Yeah.
He had been up north, actually. Up north.
To Assam by any chance?
No, not that far.
Did he visit the man from Assam?
To Delhi?
I mean, I'm just not impressed with 6 days of fever. The other guy had 16 years of fever.
Yeah,
right?
every other day too. This is true. This is very true.
So 6 days, we should treat him in the outpatient setting, right?
He's an amateur. He's an
Give
amateur.
him some aspirin and tell him to come back when he feels better.
Yeah, why doesn't he wait to see if he's really sick?
That's not right.
Okay.
We're just joking here.
I'll give people a little more information. He says that he hasn't had any significant medical problems in the past. No surgeries, not allergic to anything, doesn't know about his family's health history, doesn't know about mom or dad, thinks they're fine.
When he's on the road, does he have sex?
Let's see. He doesn't tell us about that. He's actually, I'll give you sort of ahead of time, he's really sick. He's really looking bad, and he's in a lot of distress.
Has he got pain anyplace?
Everywhere. Just
everywhere.
Hurts.
Generalized pain.
Just hurt. I mentioned he's a truck driver. He lives with his wife, 2 children. They're boys, age 6 and 8. He says he occasionally drinks some palm wine.
Has he ever?
Palm wine.
Palm wine.
Where does he get this from?
He buys it from different places. You can buy it.
In a bottle?
In a bottle. They sell it to him in a bottle.
Is it alcoholic?
Yes.
And he drives and drinks?
Don't be judgmental. He needs to make a living.
Don't be judgmental. No wonder I'm afraid to drive in India.
I don't know if he ever drives inebriated.
Are his whites of his eyes white or yellow?
Let me see here. He actually has some yellowing to the whites of the eyes.
Jaundice.
Okay.
We weren't even there yet, but
has he lost weight?
He has lost a little weight acutely.
Because of the diarrhea, I guess.
Yeah.
And lack of appetite. Is he anorectic?
He looks thin. He doesn't have a great appetite. He feels really sick.
Okay. He's anorectic.
He feels
He
bad.
might be cachectic.
Just, not really. Just sort of acutely not doing well. But in general, he was doing pretty well.
How's his breath? Does it smell?
No. Garlic smell?
Ketones.
Ketones, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ketonic breath, really?
A little bit.
Okay. It would go along with the jaundice.
Okay.
And then I mentioned the insects, the animals. I'll give you his exam.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
So when we see him, he's got a 39-degree fever.
That's
okay. So it's pretty high fever.
Significant.
But it's only 6 days. As Vincent pointed out.
Right.
His blood pressure is 100/70. His heart rate is 126.
Right.
Which is pretty fast.
Yep.
It's tachycardic, as we say.
Yep.
His respiratory rate is 24. He's breathing pretty fast. He's working a little bit there. He looks distressed, and he's a little bit decreased as far as consciousness. So he's not fully sharp. It takes sort of repeated questioning. Mm-hmm. As mentioned, he's got the jaundice, icteric sclera. So his sclera, the whites of his eyes are actually now yellow. He's breathing pretty quickly, but nothing focal on the lung exam. The heart is rapid, so it's hard to hear much. There might be a systolic murmur. His belly is tender, particularly in the upper right, and his spleen is enlarged. I take pride in my ability to palpate a spleen, but he actually feels like he's got an enlarged. I can feel his spleen.
Good.
Okay.
And the liver is normal?
The liver's tender. It's not enlarged,
not
but
enlarged,
it's tender.
But tender. In the upper right quadrant, you said.
Upper right quadrant. And I'm going to give you some initial labs, and I'm going to leave you hanging. His blood urea nitrogen is significantly elevated at 102. Normal would be up to maybe 20, let's say. His creatinine is also elevated. That's a measure of kidney function, so that's elevated. His hemoglobin is a little decreased at 11. His platelets are down at 9,000. Normal would be greater than about 150. His white count is 10.3 with 75 neutrophils, 21 lymphs, 4 monos, and no eosinophils. He has eosinopenia, as we say. His LDH is 8,000. His AST and ALT, those are the liver function tests, they're both normal. His bilirubin is 21. And the director conjugated is 4.9.
Are there any physical signs that are remarkable?
Just the...
a wound or a bite mark or a lesion of some sort?
No, and we look at him pretty carefully because scrub typhus is endemic in this area, so we're looking for eschars. Do not find any eschars on careful exam.
Has he ever felt this way before?
Never been this sick.
Okay.
What kind of animals?
There's lots of dogs, lots of cows.
Elephants. No jokes. Monkeys are everywhere. Monkeys are everywhere.
Okay. Dogs, cows, monkeys.
Exotic birds.
Viruses.
Yeah, no, my wife and I have spent some time in India, and we were quite impressed with how integrated life forms are between where people live and where animals also live. The monkeys in particular, we're everywhere.
It's really remarkable that we don't have more emerging infections from India.
Well, they got quite a few of them.
Well, they're already there, but we don't get new ones.
I mean, I remember this is the experience that when you first go to India, you don't expect anything like this. We get in a cab to go to the meeting that I was invited to, which was the Indian Institute for Architecture, and it was in Bangalore. And the cab driver is driving along, and we turn a corner, and he says, don't worry about that. That's a working elephant. Here's an elephant coming down the middle of the street in the opposite direction of traffic, dressed up with these wonderful headdresses and the tassels and all these things, and it's walking right down the middle of the road, and the cars are stopping and making way for it. It's just going to work. You know, to see something like that in a city.
Working elephant.
Don't worry about that. That's a working elephant. Gee, okay, I won't worry about it then. But it was really amazing to see. And going to work by itself, by the way. It says,
nobody riding it?
This morning, nobody was riding this elephant. It was just going to work. It says, we've got 2 jobs in the morning. You can go to lunch. You got a half hour. You can drink all you want, but we got to be back here by 3:00 because we have a roof to roof.
Does the elephant understand all this?
The elephant's nodding its trunk, and it's,
does he drink palm wine?
Only if he's very good.
Yeah, well, this is an intriguing case.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, intriguing.
Yeah, you were intrigued?
Okay.
I'm very intrigued.
You haven't figured it out?
Not yet.
All right. We'll give you that. Let's leave it with that. This episode is also sponsored by ASM Microbe, which is their big meeting coming up in Boston in June 16th through 20th. The best microbial sciences in the world. It's a combination of ICAC and the general meeting. All kinds of new venues and programs that'll get you really interested in the microbial sciences. This is the meeting you should attend if you are someone who works in that area. You learn more about this and register. And you should register by May 5th to get early bird rates discounted, asm.org/ASM microbe. We do have some emails. We have 2 emails of previous cases because some people, we record on Wednesday or Thursday, and then I post Saturday, and then in that interim, some people continue to submit. And in most cases, they're interesting to look at. First is from Christopher, who writes, "Hello, doctors. In regards to the Swiss surfer, it sounds like she has a case of thalassaiosis from Thalassia calipida." Was that the right answer?
No, that was a roundworm.
Roundworm, right. Also wanted to thank you all for putting this podcast together. I truly enjoy listening to it. And this is Dr. Christopher Martin from Emergency Medicine in Syracuse, New York.
Aha.
Always interesting to hear. He is an ER doc, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
An interesting side note, while reading The Lost City of Z by David Gran, a book about the expeditions of Percy Fawcett in the Amazon, descriptions are given on how the indigenous tribes would remove maggots with sound.
This is remarkable.
Quote,
I read
the
this.
Ekohas would make a curious whistling noise with their tongues, and at once the grub's head would issue from the blowhole. Then the Indian would give the sore a quick squeeze, and the invader would eject. Have any of you ever heard of such tricks? Thought it was an interesting tale of perhaps a lost art of native medicine, currently contrasting our Western knowledge. Daniel, ever hear of
I would
anything?
love to do a study on this. I have never heard of this.
No, never. This is the very first time ever.
All right. Very interesting.
Yeah, fascinating.
Daniel, can you take Nadia's?
Nadia writes, "I think these moving objects could be maggots, first stage because of the small size. This is going with insect exposure flies. The moving objects are the maggots of the specific necrobiotes and specific sacrobiotes flies. If these objects are seen under the microscope, you will find an interior tapering end with a black spine or hooklet, a posterior thicker end, and a segmented body. Of course, these small objects, if left to grow, will reach 1 or more centimeters in length. Also, this type of infection never affects the blood picture. Eye wash with antiseptic eye drops will be good. Eye ointment can block the respiration of these maggots and let them come out of the eye." And they were maggots, right?
Yeah.
They're from the sheep botfly.
That's right.
Now, this is very interesting. Nadia is a professor of medical parasitology at Cairo University. How about that? We have a listener in Egypt.
You bet.
I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
Dickson,
Great.
you see the reach?
I do. It's global.
Nadia, I think it's cool. This is obviously a woman.
It's a pyramid scheme.
Nadia,
That's what it is.
Nadia El Dib, and Nadia is my daughter's name, which I think is
This is all
cool.
true. So the
Dickson.
last, or not necessarily the last one, but
It is the
certainly one,
last for today.
It's called Michael. Michael writes, "Dear Vincent, Daniel, and Dickson, as a regular listener of TWiV, TWIM, and of course TWiP, I was delighted to see the latest podcast profile our paper on tuft cells, taste, and parasite immunity. In fact, after we published this paper, I mentioned to a colleague that it would be cool to end up on TWiP. I can tell you that we're pursuing several of the questions brought up by the three of you, including identifying the potential parasite agonist, or ISTs, that stimulate taste receptors in tuft cells. Thank you for a really nice discussion. I was especially gratified to hear such kind words from an esteemed parasitologist like Dickson. Arg. Keep up the good work. These podcasts are a wonderful asset to microbiology."
Michael, I believe, is the first author. Michael Howitt.
Yeah.
And that's a science paper that we did last time. I think it's cool when not only we have letters from Egypt, but we have letters from the authors of papers.
You bet.
Dickson, how many times have I told you we have a big reach? You think we're just fooling around, don't you?
You keep baiting me with these. I know all of this. You're absolutely right.
I just want you to appreciate. I know Daniel does.
We're having a violent agreement.
That's why he joined us, because he recognized this.
I wanted to be part of something great.
There you go.
Something great. All right. Well, that's
making something great out of something that wasn't so great.
a good way to end up. And this episode of TWiP you shall find on iTunes and at microbe.tv/TWiP. And now, for the first time ever, TWiP is on Google Play Music.
I love that. What tune do we play?
Google has now added podcasts to Google Play Music.
Oh, that's
and all of our podcasts at Microbe TV have been accepted, and I will put a link in the show notes. So if you like to hear your music through the Google, you can now do that. And of course, we love hearing your questions and comments, Right, Dickson?
Right, Vincent?
Send them to TWiP at Daniel. I know. I just want to make sure that you...
No, I'm on board here. I'm on board. I don't know.
Daniel, is he on board?
He's on board.
How much
it doesn't seem like it sometimes, but
no, stop. Both of you. Now I feel boxed into a corner here.
You're boxed into a corner.
How often do you beat your wife? No. That's not a good question.
We have light shining on him. Send us your questions and comments to TWiP at microbe.tv. Daniel Griffin is here at Columbia University Medical Center. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, it's been a pleasure again.
Dickson Despommier is at Racaniello.org. Thank you, Dickson.
You're welcome, Vincent.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. The music you hear on TWiP is composed and performed by Ronald Jenkins. You can find all of his work at ronaldjenkins.com. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon. Another TWiP is parasitic.